Hello, and welcome for the second time to the Secure Cloudcast. I'm Mike Foster, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kim Carlos, the one and
Hey,
only.
hey, hey,
We
hey.
have a great lineup for you today. I know we're going to be talking about KubeCon, we're going to be talking about StackRox, and we have the one and only Emmy Eide here to chat more about supply chain security. Kim, what else are we chatting about today?
We're going to talk about some updates that we've had for ACS and also OpenShift 411. And I'll give you some links and stuff to be able to read further on those things.
And for those just joining, maybe for the first time, because this is only the second show in many that we have coming up, I'm Mike Foster. I'm a StackRox community lead, as well as a principal marketing manager here at Red Hat. I came over to Red Hat during the StackRox acquisition. And so any questions, StackRox, Kubernetes security related, throw them in the chat. I'll answer as best I can. And if not, I'd love to see you in the community Slack channel. Kim, a little bit of background on you for the people watching.
Yeah. So my name's Kim Carlos, if you didn't watch last time. I have a background in security, especially over the last 7 years. I've worked in several different areas, from vulnerability management to threat intelligence to risk management, lots of different things. And so most recently, I've joined here at Red Hat to focus on the OpenShift solutions and how they relate to security use cases.
Awesome. Yeah, we've been partners in crime for what, 9 months now, 10 months?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah.
As always, so this is the second show. You can check out the recordings on YouTube. We are the third Tuesday of every month, 2 p.m. Eastern, that we go live. And so yeah, we'll see you next month, hopefully right before KubeCon, I think is what we have slotted for next month. Without further ado, though, should we kick it off with the general news?
Yeah, let's do.
All right. I think for the first thing, we're talking about ACS, right? So the latest release of Advanced Cluster Security, which is the downstream project of StackRox. And we have a new dashboard for you in 3.71 that, well, I know that a couple PMs definitely want to show you, but I'll put it in here for the crew and hopefully zoom in so you can see it. If you're new to ACS, anyways, this is what you're going to see when you first walk in. I have a very vulnerable cluster. And luckily now we can just sort through all of the plethora of security info extremely quickly. When we have multi-cluster deployments, we can click in and see violations. We can sort by our specific clusters, by our namespaces, and that just helps filter at a top level extremely quickly. Again, if you want to test it out or actually talk to the PMs directly, the Slack channel for StackRox, #StackRox, the CNCF Workspace is the best place to get it. There's like, I think, 400 or 500 people, some ex solutions architects from StackRox that are in there as well to help you with all your questions and get started. And then a couple other things, just some default policies and the ability to set eBPF as the default module for the collector as the updates. And 3.72 should be coming out soon. Look forward to that announcement, hopefully next month. So from an ACS standpoint, that's all I have. Kim, I know you had some announcements for us. What's next?
Yeah, so we had OpenShift since our last show 411 launch. And so we've made some specific security enhancements, and one of them is around supply chain security capabilities, which is something we're going to talk about today. Not necessarily the capabilities, but kind of how Red Hat handles things. Also, the ability to detect missing network policies, policy validation, and vulnerability ID, pod security admissions, integration. And then also you can check out the blog, which I think Mike's going to throw in the chat for you so that you can read more about the additions.
Perfect.
Cool.
And then from the open source side, because I like to plug StackRox all the time, we have Hacktober coming up. So StackRox is always looking for upstream contributions. And Hacktober, basically all month, there's a bunch of issues getting opened. You can comment on them. We're looking for people to be involved, and we're going to send a bunch of StackRox gear your way if you can. Also, we have StackRox community meetings the second Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, and you can find all this information at stackrox.io if you want to know more. Kim, do you have any KubeCon announcements? I don't want to hog all the announcement airtime.
Well, I'm just going to say that there will be some cool announcements. I guess can't quite share that just yet, but nope, we will be there. So be sure to come by.
And for those who are new, KubeCon's in Detroit this year, 24th to the 28th. There are always the co-located days, right? So Monday, Tuesday tends to be the day zero days. There's things like the eBPF day, Cloud Native Security Con. There's the Supply Chain Security Con now. So I'll be talking at that one. If anybody's around and interested, come and find me and ping me. And anyways, it'd be really nice to see people for the first time in 2 years. It's my first KubeCon, so I'm very excited. And then OpenShift Commons as well is on the Tuesday right before KubeCon kicks off. That's it for general updates. There's a lot of updates, very fast.
Yeah, zip.
And so we're very excited to bring on the second guest that we've had and really continuing that supply chain security conversation. Emmy Eide, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hey. So actually, let's just let you give a little elevator pitch, your background, what you do, and then we have a bunch of questions we're going to grill you with.
Great. So I'm Emmy Eide. I'm the senior manager for the supply chain security group at Red Hat. So my job is I lead the group that's responsible for securing the systems that surround the building of our offerings. So if you think about, we think about the supply chain, kind of we liken it to water treatment facilities, like if the open source is the upstream water that you're pulling from, and then you have all of the pipes that move the water through it. The water's the code. My job is to make sure that the pipes that surround that code are secure or trustworthy, rather. So I live in the Pacific Northwest, a little bit south of Seattle, and I have 2 children, husband, 2 cats, and a dog. And we spend most of our free time exploring the great outdoors here. Sailing has been a new hobby we've taken on, which has been just extraordinary because there's so much like marine mammal wildlife in the Pacific Northwest. Started cybersecurity when I was in the Army as an intelligence officer in the Army, and I've been with Red Hat for about 1.5 years. The supply chain security has been a hot topic for about 2 years. So we started our group about 1.5 years ago. So we've just been building it and working on making sure that we're doing what's right for our customers.
And how long have you been at Red Hat? Sorry, you might have mentioned, but I missed
that.
Oh,
yeah, 1.5 years. 1.5 years.
1.5 years. Okay, that's actually
2021.
Oh, very cool. I was going to say that's a great segue because we were just talking to Kirsten Newcomer in the last session, and I think she outpaces all of us at 4 or 6 years or something like that.
4 or 6, yeah.
Yeah, something.
It's pretty
there.
low. In product security, most of the folks have been there for we had 20 years for a lot of folks, and we have a lot of folks that have been there for over 10 at a minimum. So I'm still the new kid on the block.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's a welcome to all of us, or we'll just we'll say that at least. So in the recent episode, we were talking with Kirsten just about struggles in supply chain security, let's say upcoming news, why decisions were made in the past, what's coming down the pipe. I guess we can probably start off, since you are looking at Red Hat specifically, how does Red Hat approach supply chain security? I'll leave it open-ended and let you fill that in because I know it's a very broad topic.
Very broad, but it's good. It's exciting. I really enjoy talking about it. So I think I think about it as us approaching it from kind of 2 directions. One of them is how I think a lot of people think about software supply chains as hardening. So hardening the infrastructure and the systems that you're creating, manipulating, storing your code on. We do a lot with that. There's some industry standards that show best practices. We make sure we follow those just to make sure that we're not trying to come up with our own idea of what secure means. There's SSDF, which is the Secure Development Framework, and that was created by NIST. There's there's CIS, there's Salsa, which I can talk a bit about it more, which is supply chain levels for software artifacts. And so there's all of these frameworks that we can implement with how we're doing our software, how we're implementing a software supply chain. And then there's the other side of it too, which is kind of the premise of baking security in, which is really where SSDF kind of comes into play. And that's making sure that the developers are kind of approaching it from the other direction. So are the developers, do they know that they're using systems that meet certain criteria, and then can they attest to it? With when they release their product. So do we provide attestations? Are we like signing all the kind of laundry list of things that need to be done to give our customers assurances?
I know Kim's itching to ask you the next question, but I found it really interesting that you used trustworthy and hardened, and because there are so many standards out there and they're new ones in supply chain. They're not bulletproof though, right? And they're still constant. There's always work to be helping harden upstream, right?
Yeah. And so the best way, I think, in my opinion, to think about security is like, you're never going to be secure fully, right? It's not if question, it's a when question. And when you approach security like that, you start to think about it as more as like a trustworthy supply chain. Like, do you know and understand the risk that you're putting into your supply chain, into your infrastructure, and have you made the correct business decisions around that risk? And so really thinking about it, and a lot of times this is kind of a different direction, but a lot of times in security, it becomes checklist security, which frameworks can really become if you don't really apply them in a tailored way. And so taking that checklist security and leaving it to the side and thinking, how do all of these controls actually reduce my risk? What is the most important thing that we need to be focused on? Because it's not necessarily some complex thing that is going to get you. It could be something like password sharing, right? That we all know we shouldn't do, but is everyone following those guidelines and those best practices? So it's just like, so we call it hardening, and just like decreasing the amount of attack surface that could be compromised.
Because there's always the risk of implementing a control too strictly so that people try to go around it, and then you end up being less secure overall, right?
Well, and the most secure system is one that's completely shut off and disconnected from any network, right? The internet. And so because you're not going to do that and actually get any product out the door, it is like a risk versus reward. Everything that you do, everything you decide, making sure that the engineering teams have the right tools that they need in order to make good risk-based decisions.
Makes sense.
Cool. Now I'm back to my burning question. So we understand, like you just mentioned, that there's a lot of technology that are, advancing, right? And we want to be able to take advantage of those, but they come with those risks, and you have to decide what are those exceptions. But I'd love for you to explain to us a little bit more about how Red Hat can really help harden, or how we go about hardening pipelines.
So, one of the big things that we make sure we do is we do security assessments on our entire supply chain. So we make sure that we at least know the risk, right? That's something that it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to do good security risk assessments on any piece of tool or infrastructure, especially if you build it in-house. A lot of times, if you do use third party, you can rely on them to provide you with a risk assessment, but it's also going to depend on how you're implementing that tool. So someone using a Red Hat product we could hand them like, hey, here's our risk assessment for it, but it really depends on how you're implementing it and like what you might be circumventing. Like if we have something set up by default and you're circumventing it to make it easier, that's going to maybe change your risk level. So that's something we align those with kind of those industry best practices and those frameworks that I was talking to you about. And then another thing is making sure that we have those tailored solutions to each system. So I could sit there and as a security professional, I say like it's a security pedestal, right? Like we sit on security pedestals sometimes and we say, everyone go ahead and implement, security control X. And then every single system owner has to figure out how to implement it. And it might not be appropriate. It might not be, they might need some extra work to be done on my side in order for it to actually take place. They might need IT to get involved. And so for them to have a security risk assessment, and this is their remediation plan for getting all of their security controls gaps closed, it's going to be very specific to the system, what it can do, what it's offering, what's its role. Is it read access or is it write access, right? So like all of those little nuances are really important for security professionals. And in Red Hat, this is what we do, is we make sure that we're considering all of that so that we're not slowing progress, and that we are really involved in the productization process rather than just kind of sitting back with our little clipboards and saying like, oh, sorry, you didn't meet my requirement that makes no sense to you.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't envy that at all, because I talk about the same story, but just specific to ACS and Kubernetes clusters, and that's a challenge in and of itself, right? You want to implement one policy at a cluster level, and then all of a sudden you get a bunch of development teams like, wait, why is my image? Why can't I deploy this container?
Right.
Yeah, so then you have to obviously like work with people upstream. You got to make sure that you have all the parties on board with what you're trying to do, right? Just implement a couple small changes, right?
Yeah, and I think that's it, right? Like working with people. And so I think that there's often this kind of conflict between engineering teams and security teams because they see security as a roadblock, but it's once you form that partnership, like, you know, the world's your oyster. Like you are working together for the same company to sell, like we're all here for the same reason, right? Like, so it's, yeah.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, and I'll try to frame this properly. It is, but I think that it's kind of short-sighted, because maybe you have to meet once every couple of weeks to make sure things are, and you're lowering the vulnerabilities and you're doing the right things. But as we saw last year, when something like Log4Shell happens, everything just shuts down for a week while everybody's trying to figure out what the impact is. Developers get completely blocked for a long amount of time while they're trying to figure out configuration, right? So there's a little bit of working together to smooth that pipeline and triage accordingly so that you can avoid those big mishaps, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I phrased that the best way possible, but speaking of that, because in that all of Red Hat's products and trying to get them all to let's say swim downstream from all our open source orgs, how do you understand and reduce risk, and how do you have that conversation between all the developers across all the products?
So we've started something that I have a lot of passion for, and it's working just, I think, really well throughout Red Hat. It's something that we call the Pipeline Security Partnership. And it is kind of an integrated process that we are doing in Red Hat, which is we create our security requirements and have a tentative timeline, and we actually work with all of the developers and the engineering teams to make sure that we're getting into their quarterly planning, that we are considering all of the things that make sense to them in their situation, and making sure that like all of our documentation and the request matches what is actually feasible on the other side. And then, but we're working together throughout the whole process so that there's more than just security bought into it. So when these things like Log4Shell pop up, we have already a process in place. We can do that rapidly. That makes those changes across the board. So like at Red Hat, we have a lot of different offerings. We produce them in multiple ways. So we might produce, they can be consumed in multiple ways. So that requires kind of different parts of the pipelines to move in different ways. And so all of those have to be integrated. They all have to be secured similarly. We have to make sure that we're using standard security across the board. So that partnership helps. I think I went off sidetrack, but that partnership helps quite a bit with that in our process. So we're that's, I think is there a slide that you could show? There's a cyclical slide. Did you happen to see that?
Oh yeah, the production process.
Yeah.
I think I remember you sending it to me. I'll try to find it while you're going through it.
I can speak to it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can speak to it. So it's basically your question was, as throughout the process, the productization process, how are we securing things? Was that what you were?
Yeah, and how do you reduce risk, right? Because you have that feedback loop, and so if something big happens, you obviously triage it, but then there's always the day-to-days and minor changes, and it's a big portfolio, so you have to be selective.
Yeah, I think that with all of the actions that we take throughout it, and teaching more about security, empowering engineering teams to make risk-based decisions reduces risk kind of in itself, because they're constantly thinking about it. So are their priorities risk-based? So if they say, hey, we're not going to be able to do control X until this date, say, great, let's talk about what that means for risk. What are you exposing? What are you keeping, right? And making sure that that those little data decisions can be made with the right thought in mind, rather than it's just another security task. Like there's a reason behind it. So anytime we put a security requirement out to our organization, we provide what the security risk is and the justification for needing it.
Mhm.
We have a little bit of an advantage in the supply chain area because there's constantly more supply chain like acts happening. So it does provide quite a bit of fodder for like being able to say like, hey, we don't want to end up in that situation, and we don't.
Mhm.
If we can get in front of this, then we should be able to prevent this type of attack from occurring. But it really is about like bringing the security team to the productization process, but also bringing the engineering team to security, so that like we're on the same wavelength, that there's no surprises, that we're not sending out emails that is a new security standard that someone has to meet, that like hopefully they paid attention or they're going to get disconnected from the network, right? Like that you're working together as a team, all really working towards the same goal. And so
Mhm.
I think the partnership process has really helped with that, has helped to get everyone kind of on the same page. And I've noticed that even in the last like year and a half, the conversations internally that we have as far as like what we want to do, have changed dramatically, and all for the better of like really, really doing what's right for Red Hat and our customers.
Mhm. Do you notice any of that momentum bleed into upstream communities? Because I'm seeing a lot of different issues in the CNCF and other open source orgs. So I was just kind of curious because obviously, we do have a bunch of upstream projects. Is the standard
Yeah.
set kind of all across the board, all the way up as far as we can go?
I
Might be out of
I
scope.
don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have direct involvement in some of that, but I will say that as we develop like internal security tools, if we're able to open source it and push it, we do. So if we're able to, implement automated governance, then that would be something that we push upstream. And so we're able to kind of feed the community in that way.
Mhm.
That's at least the scope of where I'm at. A lot of product security and Red Hat is involved in a lot of the OpenSSF work streams. And so that's another way that we're kind of contributing back to open source. So like I go to the Salsa specification meetings. I'm pretty involved in that, making sure that what we're going to be asking in Salsa is not something that's completely unachievable by a smaller company, right? But that it's still meeting what the standard would be for what customers need.
That makes sense. Kim, didn't you have a salsa question?
Yes. You
Okay.
mentioned it actually a little bit earlier, and I know that's kind of been a nice framework that people are using. But I would love for you to tell us more about it, like in more detail.
Yeah, so Salsa, supply chain levels for software artifacts, is a NIST, or it's an OpenSSF framework that maps directly to a lot of the controls in NIST. In fact, Red Hat did a mapping for OpenSSF and for the community to be able to consume so that they can make sense of it. Because there are so many security frameworks and they can be really hard to make sense of. And we're lucky enough to have a big product security organization to work through making sense of this, but not all of our customers have that ability. And so we wanted to make sure that it's as easy to implement as possible, especially if people aren't sure where to start. Like a lot of organizations have one security person, right? So Salsa, if you think about it, kind of like maturity levels. So level 1, it's level 1 through level 4. It actually can't claim level 4 yet because it hasn't been produced. So just as like a side note, we are working towards the controls, like Red Hat's working towards the controls of level 3 and 4. And it's best not to think about it like you are level 1, you are level 2. It is more like for source integrity, I am level 3. For provenance, I'm level 4. So like in different lines within each, you can say like, I meet this level in this line, rather than some compliance frameworks or compliance certifications that are out there. It's like kind of either all or nothing. Like you have to fit all of these criteria. This one's specific, but it also provides, there's a requirement for attestation for it. So as you're producing your offering, you have to have a signed attestation that shows logically how you've met all of these controls. And that's helpful to the customer, because I've seen some supply chain questionnaires, which are created usually by the customer. And those are great, but they're completely manual. There's a lot of overhead associated with not only filling them out, but also receiving them and processing the results. The nice thing about Salsa is that it's an automated process to get that attestation out there. So I think it's great that there's so much focus on Salsa or on the supply chain, and that there's even like a framework kind of solely dedicated to it, because it is an important aspect of like how you're like the whole SolarWinds attack. Like that is a really good example of why this kind of stuff is important, because it wasn't necessarily the company that was hacked that was impacted, it was their customers, which is why supply chain security is kind of terrifying. It's a really good entrance point for an attacker who wants to hit a broad base, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think because they call it artifacts specifically, which I thought was interesting phrasing. And then you think, well, you're storing your code somewhere. Then maybe you're building your container image in a pipeline. Then you're deploying it in a different pipeline, and it's going into a test in a different cluster, right? And so it's like you said, it's not just compliance at one specific part, but you have to make sure that throughout that whole chain, that there's attestation, that you know what's going on, that you know who has access to it, right? And also from a security standpoint, as an auditor, I would love that. Always automated, and it's just like, here, pull me all the changes over the last month and tell me exactly what's happened, and it should all be there, right?
It's also being level 1 is not, or level 2 is not a negative thing either. So I think the automatic kind of response from a lot of companies is to say, oh, we have to be level 4 or it's not worth it at all. Any sort of feedback you can provide your customers so they can make risk-based decisions as well, especially if you're part of their supply chain. So like Red Hat creates offerings that are parts of other people's supply chain. So allowing customers to make a risk-based decision based on like what we're doing is really beneficial to the customer. And I think also as part of being in Red Hat and our open, transparent like culture that we have here, being able to kind of attest to that in a way that doesn't put us at risk as a company, but like provides our customers with the information that they need, is always been a really hard bridge to cross with security and customers. So I think this and SSDF are both really good kind of avenues for that.
Yeah, and speaking of open culture, because this might spark some debate in the chat. Backport or rebasing came up, and I know that in the open source community, there's certain container images that are kind of base images that move quicker than others. A lot of it's because a security fix comes out and it's boom, just push the next version, tell everybody to use that one. Kind of curious what your opinion is on well, first maybe differentiate it for anybody watching, and then give us your thoughts.
So backporting is when you apply a security fix to an existing version. A lot of customers don't see that security fix. It just kind of happens. Really end users. It's not something that we would experience as end users typically, like on our local computer or phone or whatever it might be. The one we experience the most is rebasing, which is when to get the security fix, you have to update the version. But a lot of times companies at the same time that they're working on new features and fun things for customers, a new security advisory comes in and they have to update at the same time, so they pair them. But what can happen is incompatibilities with your infrastructure. So while that's fine and dandy for a piece of software that doesn't have a lot of dependencies on it, it kind of operates independently. When you're an enterprise, and I have like a special empathy for this with a supply chain where there's dependencies on it working properly with whatever product you're creating on top of that. Anytime you update, it can cause compatibility problems. It might stop your supply chain completely. And so being able to apply security fixes through backporting is huge. And there's also, as that version gets farther and farther away from the community version, we've applied more and more security patches to them. So like it would be a lot harder to keep up to date the most recent community version. And you're actually there's like a really happy point of still like compatible with everything. Features are good. And it's like all of the security patches are there, so it's not as vulnerable. We've actually have a couple of instances that we point to of when the version, the open source version was available and it was vulnerable, and anyone using ours was not, even because it was an old version that we had already patched previously to getting exploited.
Mhm.
So I appreciate it because enforcing updates is like one of IT's nightmares, right? Like, everyone reboot your computer, right? Like, what is it, Tuesdays or Microsoft Tuesdays or whatever it was, like back in the 90s. Yeah. So for enterprises in the supply chain, absolutely, backporting is a really good option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we ran into this conversation too when StackRox open sourced. When Red Hat Advanced Cluster Security turned StackRox into the open source upstream version, there was the conversation of, how much code do you accept? If you accept it and it gets into the product, well, that has to be supported. You have to make sure that you're quashing vulnerabilities. So it becomes this: how much do you accept? Who do you respond to first, right? And I think that's sort of Red Hat's whole motto is we make sure that one, code meets our standards; two, that we're constantly checking for vulnerabilities and backporting fixes into the supported versions. And then that's what we can tell people, right? We can say, hey, you can use the open source version, but you might not get the response time you're looking for when something major happens, right?
Right.
And I mean, I have this chat in the Slack channels every day and say, it's we'll run the exact same. It's the same product, but those are the things that you need to watch out for. So
one of the only like things that is like something that I've been recently thinking about is that security scanners, there can be a delay with the vulnerable versions. And so if you run a security scanner to check it, it's worth reaching back to Red Hat to say, hey, has this been, I think we have an advisory page you can look at to see if it's been backported in. That way it's she's done with the conversation.
Oh, we lost Kim.
Yeah.
Hey, she's back. All right, good. I got word there for a second.
But so it's worth reaching back just to double check that if your scanner does come across that as a vulnerability, it might not actually be accurate.
And I know that there's like little quirks because Advanced Cluster Security is a fork of Claire, and Claire runs in Quay. Certain things like, we report on fixable and non-fixable issues. Some scanners only report on the fixable ones because why would you tell a developer about all the things that they can't fix, right? So there's different features and functionality. But yeah, again, if the vulnerabilities aren't matching up, especially with the Red Hat feeds, that's definitely worth reporting, right? Kim, any other burning questions? I didn't see anything in the chat, because I think that was pretty in depth. What do you have, Kim?
I don't want to derail.
Oh,
but while you're here, we've been talking about frameworks and how many there are, and exceptional, like what's an acceptable risk and things like that. But in my experience, a lot of times with these frameworks, there's a lot of overlap, right? And one you may consider this best versus this best, and it's like, in terms of Red Hat and our security, like how do we decide, or in general, like how do we decide which frameworks to take this piece of or this piece of when we're building like what our best practice is going to be and how we do our risk?
I mean, the first one's applicability. So some of them were kind of, the hand might be forced with, are we, like, for a good example is the executive order that came out in May of last year, the cybersecurity executive order that applied to anything that was considered critical software, which Red Hat has critical software to the government. So they basically say you have to follow this framework. And so that is one way that we decide which framework is important. Another one is any certifications that are required to sell to a certain group, like FedRAMP is another example. And then it's more, and then the rest of it's more about like applicability. So SSDF is pretty new. We had, I'm not sure what our hand was in it, but I think we had some hand in it. But that one was just, it fit really nicely into how we do productization. Sometimes because we're an open source company, things don't really fit, or aspects of it don't fit. And so that goes back to that whole like tailored use your brain approach. We're not robots. Not you use your brain, but like we have to
Hey,
use our
what are you
brains
trying
to
to say,
like
Emmy?
pull up like pull it off. This is not applicable, not applicable. Um, lots of research, lots of really smart folks. I never worked with smarter people in my life. We've got a really good group of people, so I love it.
Great.
But just very thoughtful people. It's really about like remembering we're all human at the end of the day, and that this is all a company run by humans and created for other humans. Like, so
Mhm.
we can automate a lot, and it's great to automate the things, especially that are draining for your folks. So certain governance activities it's really nice to automate those. But at the end, you do have there is a responsibility to like make sure that you're cutting out the pieces that are just noise.
Mhm.
This is a big thing with like scanners and people wanting to implement scanners and code scanners. Like it can create a lot of noise.
Mhm.
And are we leaving that up to the engineers of the development teams to cut out that noise, or is us as a security organization cutting out all the noise, or are we doing some like consolidated approach to it? So for Red
Oh,
Hat,
that's,
it's
I was
more
going
for
to
the
say,
latter.
that's a good question because in your experience, do you find that the consolidated approach works best? What have you kind of seen in
I
practice?
always think the consolidated approach works
Yeah.
better for like anything. I think silos can cause a lot of problems, especially in the security field, because you end up someone happens to know something over here that we didn't recognize when we were creating the requirement in the first place. Like,
Mm. But
so
then,
I always prefer the collaborative approach.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, a lot more hands-on just because one, developers hate all those notifications. They're already swamped with GitHub and code commit notifications. So
yeah.
what's another vulnerability? And then, I mean,
Hmm.
just speaking from Kubernetes perspective, a lot of security teams, like you said, with code scanning, they might not necessarily know how it gets implemented in the cluster or the configuration of the containers. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, you do need both teams to come to the table. It's just requires buy-in, right?
Yes. Yeah. And mutual, I would say, investment into it from both sides, that wanting it to succeed. I think fires tend to happen and people kind of get bogged down with like some new priority that's taking them away from like all these good intentioned things.
Hmm.
So it's really, especially with security, when there's not a fire, keeping on top of like all of um, the momentum behind
Hmm.
it to say like, great, is security a priority? Is it actually a priority? Have you invested resources into it, or have you just told me it's a priority? Because there's a huge, that can be a big variance there. So
From just a personal and maybe cultural perspective,
yeah.
when security is going well, you don't notice it. It should be running smoothly. How do
Huh.
you keep yourself motivated? Like when things are running smoothly and you're like, oh, okay, things are going great. How do you like, you know, or
I will let you
Check it
know
out.
when there's
okay,
a
all
point in
right. Well,
time where we
pick,
like, no, I don't know, I really enjoy security stuff. So it like fascinates me all the different ways that you can, all the red teaming side of it. Like, how can you get into a network? How can you like take advantage? Like, what's the likelihood that this would even happen? I mean, like, can someone pivot when they get into the network? And when they do pivot, what can they do with different responsibilities? I just find it so interesting that it's not like a lot for me to get like
Mhm.
involved in it. But I think personally focus on what processes can be improved so that during those cases of emergencies, things can flow smoother and that they're less disruptive to product teams
Mhm.
and to our company overall. Like, yeah, we can have an emergency without having to shut the company down. It's not right. Like it's
Yeah.
it's just part of it. Like we know that emergencies will happen. We know that fires will happen. We know security events will happen. And how can we respond in a way that is organized and good for everybody, good for the company, good for our customers?
Cool.
Cool. Yeah, Kim, any last thoughts? I am exhausted on
Yes.
my personal questions. Oh, yeah?
Yes.
All right.
So I'm curious because you're talking about kind of, best practices and things running smoothly and ways to do things. But you mentioned specifically with silos and how dangerous those can be. And it seems
Mm-hmm.
like I would say over the past, I don't know, 10 years in general, but like I would say the last 5 years and even over the past 2 years, with so many things going virtual seemingly overnight, it's easier, I think, to have those silos, but more important than ever than not just to collaborate, but also for everybody to take on kind of this joint accountability for security. No matter what it is you do, it plays a role. And I think that Red Hat does that. At least that's what I've seen. And I'm just curious to your take on it.
Yeah, I think Red Hat is uniquely good at, especially for a company this size, not saying that's not my job, I'm not going to worry about it. So because we don't do that, I think it allows for a lot of cross collaboration with other groups in Red Hat. I think we still fall victim to the, just because you can't turn around and see if someone's in a meeting, because you can't see if they're busy in that moment, you might not want to just ping them out of band. And so their silos just kind of naturally happen, I think, in a remote. I'm not sure we're quite advanced enough as being remote workers to kind of get rid of those just yet. But so it takes a lot of work to keep them down. But
I think our workspace groups also help. Some of the blasts that go out asking for help are always they're always welcome.
Yeah, I think the amount, it really, I think, goes to also the amount of vulnerability that anyone on a team might have, be able to show, kind of to say hey, I don't understand what this is. I need help with it. And that requires a lot of vulnerability, especially written down. So for someone, and this is more of a leadership perspective, but for someone being able to write down that they don't know something and that they need help, that requires a lot for people to trust that they're going to have positive feedback. They are going to get that help that they need, but it also drives us all in the right direction. But I think Red Hat, again, is just very good about that. And maybe it goes to the whole community approach and that's kind of how it was founded. But especially for 20,000 people, I've seen a lot of good coordination with that.
Very cool.
All right, I won't ask any more questions.
I was going to say, you keep it going. I think somebody's getting buzzed. I heard that anyways. Yeah, so no other questions in the chat. I didn't see. Emmy, is there any specific resources you want to give a shout out to for any of our watchers? I put the Salsa chat in. I put the 411 blog in. SSDF, I think, was another one that you gave a shout out to.
Yeah, SSDF, I don't have the link offhand. It's a NIST framework, so you'll find it on the NIST website. Another one is our security blogs that we do. So Product Security in Red Hat puts out blogs, and on a variety of different topics. My team's putting out blogs as well. They're all there to be informative and open and transparent with our customers, and they're there for the internet to see and critique, which is really fun. But hopefully it's informative, just kind of understand the approach we're taking at Red Hat as well.
Awesome. Yeah. That's all I had, Kim. Are you
No, I promise I won't ask any more questions. It's just you were here and you know so many things. It's just great to have you.
Yeah, this is awesome. Until next Thursday, next month? I gotta find the exact date, but the third Tuesday, of next month, we'll be back. Secure Cloudcast, and if you follow along in the calendar, it'll show up as well. And if you're on YouTube, just hit the little notification bell, and you'll get a ping from us. I'm leaving it up to Kim. You can sign us off.
All
so
right.
Any last words?
Hasta la pasta. We'll see you next month.
I love it.
Awesome.
Thank you, Emmy. Take care.
All right. Thanks. Bye.